Добро вечер, гледате Клик Плюс, јас сум Боријан Јовановски. Вечерва во Клик Плюс две гостинки. Моја прва гостинка е амбасадорката на Соединетите Американски држави Кейт Бърнс. Со неја разговаравме за војната во Украина, за ризикот од проширување на таа војна на Балканот, за поделеноста на јавното мислење во Македонија на оваа тема, но и за борбата против корупцијата и реформите во судството. По разговорот со амбасадорката Бърнс ке може да го проследите мојот разговор со Росана Алесковска од невладината организација МОСТ, која го анализира наративот на Русија и нивната аргументација за тоа зошто ја направи инвазијата на Украина. Останете со нас. Почнуваме со интервјуто со амбасадорката на Соединетите Американски држави Кейт Бърнс, со која разговаравме за војната во Украина, ризикот од нејзино прелевање на Балканот, но и за теми како што е борбата против корупцијата во Македонија и реформите во судството. Погледнете го интервјуто со амбасадорката Бърнс, кое го снимивме денеска предпладне. Ambassador Bърнс, like everywhere in the world, here too we are upset with the war in Ukraine. How far is Macedonia from Ukraine in the present circumstances?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to come on your show to talk about this critical moment in international security and also how it affects our strategic partnership. On the subject of Ukraine, North Macedonia, as a NATO ally, as a strong partner in lockstep with the EU, as a responsible member of the international community, is joining with the rest of us, with the United States and others, to condemn the actions that are taking place in Ukraine right now, Russia's brutal aggression, its active war on Ukraine, stepping up to make sure that that condemnation is clear and strong. But it's also stepping up in support of the people of Ukraine, as we all are, providing them the support that they need right now, ensuring at one point that there will be accountability for Russia's actions. At the same time, North Macedonia is working with us in NATO and bilaterally to be focused on defending against our allied interests, working through NATO to ensure that our Article 5 commitment is ironclad and that we are prepared to defend against any other further actions that may take place, and that we are prepared as an international community to address the long-term consequences of what we're seeing take place, again, with this premeditated, unjustified and unlawful action by Russia against Ukraine.
Our country, as other countries in the region, we were and still exposed to the Russian influence. Nowadays we see a sharp polarization within the public opinion between those who are pro-Western oriented and the others who are supporting Putin policy. Are we vulnerable already?
I think what's important, as you've seen across the international community, in the United States, here in North Macedonia, across Europe, and across the globe, frankly, is a clear understanding of the need to defend our global security structures and our international systems and our rules-based orders. And in the face of this kind of violation, this stark, blatant action by Russia, it has never been more clear that we have to be firm in our views and to be vocal and to take a strong position. So I don't think there's any room for looking at this in anything but a clear and focused way in terms of what the consequences are. So when that comes to thinking about this region and some of the longstanding views, look, a week ago, we, the United States, had a very different relationship with Russia. The international community had a very different relationship with Russia a week ago. But now, when we have seen these actions that have taken place, and we see the consequences, the human consequences that are being inflicted upon the innocent people of Ukraine who have done nothing to justify this kind of action or to provoke it in any way whatsoever, and we know that there's going to be consequences for all of us as an international community, whether that's the humanitarian impact or the economic aspects, that we know we have to take a clear stand. We have to condemn these actions. We have to hold Russia accountable, and we have to isolate them financially and politically so that there's a clear message around the world that this kind of behavior is unacceptable.
Still, I would like to ask you something more about this polarization. Do you see an illustration in this polarization in Macedonia between people pro-Western and pro-Putin oriented, kind of an illustration for the failure of the Western world to integrate Macedonia? I'm talking about all delays with Macedonia, the process of the European integration, and etc.
So first, what we've actually seen from the people of North Macedonia is an incredible amount of support for the people of Ukraine. I think we have, all of us who've been watching television, have been just amazed by the strength and the courage of the Ukrainian people. And I think there has been a profound and widespread show of support for what the Ukrainians are doing, for standing up for freedom and democracy. And I think this is something that the people of North Macedonia and of this region truly understand at their core. And I have to say that I've been very impressed at the way that citizens and also throughout the political leadership, people have taken a strong stand on this measure very, very seriously. On some of these other issues that you're talking about in terms of public opinion, look, I think it's time for there to be a broad conversation about what we really stand for. And I think that people are showing their true colors today. Unfortunately, we had seen Putin through the media sources, through other information, try to tell a different narrative. And unfortunately, some of that narrative is still out there. But the facts show, and facts will show over time, that what they have done and what they have are continuing to do against the people is unjustified. There is no justification for this. And whatever calculations they are making are not consistent with those of us who stand for freedom and for democracy. I think that conversation is taking place.
Do you think if Putin goes beyond Ukraine, Balkan is a potential target, having in mind the fragile spots like Bosnia and Kosovo?
Well, I think that it's impossible for me to characterize where he may go or what his thinking is, and it's not really very helpful to do that. I do think as an international community that we have to be prepared, and we are preparing ourselves for any eventuality, any threat to our international security, whether it comes from Moscow and the Kremlin or elsewhere. So this has really crystallized for us the importance of focusing on redoubling our investments in the rules-based international order, in implementing Western values, and also strengthening the Western institutions that are responsible for this. For us here in North Macedonia, it's actually a galvanizing moment. It's a reminder that we have been working hard and in partnership with the government and the people of North Macedonia for decades towards your Euro-Atlantic integration. Bringing North Macedonia into NATO was a major step, and we are seeing the results of that move today, actually, and how things are playing out on the ground. So for us, it's very important to see the next step take place for North Macedonia and for the Western Balkans as a whole, move to Europe as part of a Europe that is whole, free, and secure. And that means integration in Euro-Atlantic institutions. I think what you're referring to here is this deep sense of frustration, and it's real frustration, and I hear it too, that these processes have not moved faster. So I do think that one of the things that this moment underscores is the need to get those processes moving again, to accelerate efforts to see North Macedonia fully integrated, move towards opening its negotiating framework with the European Union, advancing on all fronts to bring this country into alignment, not just with EU institutions, but with the aspirations of the citizens here for, again, a long period of time. That is my next question. After all, it's a high time for Europe and Western world to be united. Yes, the question is, do you think that it's also high time for EU to start the negotiation talks with Albania and Macedonia without any delay, and not to waste time with the debate about the events from the 19th century? So I think, obviously, the people of North Macedonia, they need steps forward. They don't need any further setbacks. And I think, we have been very clear as the United States from the beginning that we support North Macedonia's accession to the EU. Even though we're not a member of the EU, we have believe that it is in the strategic interest of North Macedonia, of the region, of the EU, and even of the United States. So we have consistently said and clearly said that we want to see this EU accession process move forward as quickly as possible. I do think that you are seeing a level of unity and resolve among the international community, among the U.S., its European partners, and the Western community as a whole on the importance of moving forward, not just to defend our global security, but to advance our shared agenda of democracy and rule of law. And that's exactly what North Macedonia's EU accession would help promote. So I'm optimistic that what we're seeing right now with this level of unity, this focus on democracy and rule of law, this recognition that it's never mattered more than in this moment, that we'll also see some of that urgency translate into positive momentum, including with respect to Bulgaria and North Macedonia. We've been encouraged by what we've seen as a reinvigorated diplomatic discussion between the two capitals. We're encouraged by the fact that there are now working groups that are working not only to look at resolving some of the bilateral differences, but also to trying to bring about some long-term cooperation that'll benefit the citizens of both countries and help promote the idea that this process of EU accession is truly in the interest of both countries. So I'm optimistic that there will be some progress ahead.
You follow closely as our strategic partner the relations between Sofia and Skopje. In this terms of what you said, I mean, do you believe that this time we are on the right path and that we could arrive at the proper destination in June as wishes?
As you wish. Look, I certainly hope so. The bilateral discussion has to be one that is undertaken bilaterally, and we've always said that bilateral issues should be dealt with bilaterally outside of the IGC framework, and there's an opportunity to do that. I have had the opportunity to meet with the new Prime Minister, as well as to meet with a number of the ministers that are now involved in various aspects of the discussions, and what I hear from them is a commitment to using this moment of opportunity, of new opening with the new government in Sofia, to try to resolve some of these differences and to try to reach an agreement that will allow the process to move forward so that North Macedonia can hold its IGC and then begin the process of moving through the opening and closing of chapters and meeting the requirements for eventual EU membership. So we're obviously watching this very closely. We certainly hope that these discussions generate that kind of momentum and help bridge these differences so that everything can move forward. And then, once the IGC is held, that this same sense of urgency will be applied to then meeting the actual requirements and delivering on the reforms that are necessary for your ultimate integration into the EU.
Talking about the reforms, your focus is mostly on the reform processes in the juridical system. United States invested a lot in those processes. You met yesterday Minister of Justice, the new Minister of Justice, Mr. Tupanchevsky. So where we are with these reforms? I mean, we are talking about the reform process in the juridical system since I started to work as a journalist, and I'm not young, as you see. So, and these reform processes are very high on the agenda over the few decades already. So where we are, and could we arrive at the destination?
Yeah. So our relationship with North Macedonia for a long time has been focused on helping North Macedonia fully integrate into Euro-Atlantic institutions, whether that was NATO, and now as we focus on the EU. It is true that a huge part of our effort here has been focused on rule of law, and there's a reason for that. First and foremost, because rule of law underpins all democratic institutions, all economic prosperity, and ultimately security. It is the fundamental factor in ensuring that the needs of the citizens are met. So we have endeavored through our various programs and our offices here to try to help support the government's agenda on moving rule of law efforts, and particularly efforts related to the independence of the judiciary and the functioning of the judiciary forward. That has been a big focus, and we have a number of programs that work on that. This is a hard problem. This is a complicated issue. Much of democracy is complicated, and I think there's a a great quote that President Biden referenced at the Summit of Democracies that he hosted in December and talking about some of these issues. He quoted our late civil rights leader and former Congressman John Lewis, and he said, "Democracy is not a state. Democracy is an act." And we have always seen moving forward on democratic reforms, on rule of law reforms, is something that takes work. It takes hard work, and it takes a lot of guts and energy in order to be able to ultimately root out corruption and the graft and cronyism that have held back progress and really get at some of the fundamental problems. What we have tried to do in the last few years is really target our assistance and our cooperation on the areas that the citizens have said are their priorities. So we look at some of the polls that are out there. There was a governance and democracy poll last year in which 83% of the citizens of North Macedonia who participated said that corruption was either a serious or a very serious problem. That's huge. And we also saw a Eurothink poll very recently that said only 8% of the citizens here have confidence in judiciary and in the prosecution. So for us, that's a message that this is a place to put our investment. And so these are the conversations we've had. As you noted, I did meet with the Minister of Justice, reiterated our support. They have an agenda. They have a government agenda. It's in keeping also with their EU agenda and the commitments they're making in order to prepare themselves for eventual EU membership. And what we're looking to do is to try to align our expertise, our assistance into helping them meet those goals. But ultimately, it's the citizens that are going to set those goals for them and that are going to hold the government to account for their progress and delivering on those kinds of reforms.
You mentioned well the credibility of the judiciary, and it's a huge frustration. I mean, people need a rule of law, impartial judiciary. So after all, I mean, you as an ambassador, previous ambassador of the United States, you followed very closely those processes. After all experience you have, what are the main obstacles that we are not able to achieve what we need to achieve after so many years of reforms? What's the main obstacle? Political, business, shadow forces? What's the problem?
I don't think that there's one obstacle to progress. I think the problem is that the system is open and vulnerable in many different places, and to be truly successful, you've got to attack every level of the institutional structures and of the system in order to be successful. And so that means it's a combination of promoting transparency, making available to the citizens and the voters what is actually happening. There is a need for a system of accountability. So that's both in terms of the judicial structures, but also in terms of the individuals that hold particular offices. Those individuals need to be qualified for their positions, and then they need to be held accountable for doing their positions and conducting their positions and for making sure the systems work. So I think there's a number of things that the government has to tackle. They have a very complex plan on anti-corruption, on reforming of the judiciary, and we are working actually also very much in conjunction with our EU and other international partners to see where we can make the most difference in providing some assistance. For us, one immediate focus, of course, has been on the appointments of judges and prosecutors, supporting the Academy of Judges and Prosecutors. So there's a system for making some of those appointments, but we've also been focused on other areas. For example, we have a team this week doing some virtual judge mentoring, one-on-one mentoring, to see where we can be most helpful in helping provide those support.
Talking about the experience, United States was the main sponsor of the SPO, if I may say. Of course, European Union was there, but United States was focused on this project. This project failed, unfortunately. We know the story. What have you learned out of this?
Well, I think the experience of this, and particularly the fact that there are still cases from the former SPO that are working through the system, is that people want to see justice delivered, and that means they want to see cases move through the system. They want to see them be treated by competent professionals, free from political interference, and with an ultimate resolution that provides accountability for whatever has been proven to be the crimes committed. So we have seen that there's an urgency to complete the work of the former Special Prosecutor's Office cases, get them moving through the system, and to see justice delivered and on these issues. And we've also seen, and this was addressed in the subsequent law in the Public Prosecution Office, that there's an important need to be made to look at the processes and how both the positions and the processes are governed to ensure that these cases will move through the system without political interference. There's still a hard challenge ahead, but there's a lot of folks who are focused on trying to make this system work.
That is my next question. What's the destiny of the SPO cases? Because many people believe that those cases are objects of the different political deals.
So, I mean, first of all, there's a juridical answer to that, which is the need to move through the system. But the second point that I think you're alluding to is there's also a perception issue, right? The citizens want to see justice served.
And they almost do not believe that there will be some outcome out of the process.
Right. And any delay in justice only further undermines their confidence in the institutions, which is why it's so important to take a holistic approach and to look at the systems. Because until these systems begin to deliver in an efficient way and to move these cases forward, the citizens aren't going to be able to trust that it's not just equal protection under the law, it's equal accountability under the law. And this is what citizens are really seeking.
Fighting corruption is high on your agenda, but high on everybody's agenda, of course.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to see corruption present everywhere. But could we be more specific talking about the corruption? Where is this corruption right now? I mean, we know there is a cultural problem. Corruption is everywhere, and people are somehow used to live with the corruption. But could we be more specific to define what are the main sources of the corruption?
Yeah. So it's very interesting you say that. We have been working, as you know, for many years on the issue of corruption. But one thing that happened last year was that President Biden recognized that corruption was an international problem. It was on the level of a problem that he recognized no one nation can answer alone. And he issued an executive order that put fighting corruption front and center in our national security policy. So we now have a national security policy that says fighting corruption is in our national security interest. And he followed that up by launching an initiative called the Summit for Democracies, in which he pulled together communities of democracies from around the world to have a common dialogue and discussion about how we could come together using our resources to help get at exactly what you're talking about. How to figure out where does the corruption exist, and then what can we do to get at it? Now, for every country, it's going to have to be a national solution, but there are ways that we can work together. And we were very pleased to see President Pendarovsky in December at the Summit for Democracies stand up and outline a whole-of-government approach to fighting corruption and promoting good governance that would involve every level of government and invite participation also from the private sector, from NGOs, to be part of this global effort. And through that, we're looking at ways where we can bring our best practices, our shared expertise, and to some degree some of our tools and instruments to bear to help support each other to take on these issues. Because at the end of the day, again, it's up to us to fix our democratic institutions and to make sure that they're accountable. But there are ways that we can support each other in that process.
Do you see the corruption on the high political level? And do you think that we have learned well the lessons out of our experience with the capture state?
I certainly think what you see in North Macedonia is a very dynamic discussion about corruption and the dangers of corruption at every level. I mean, I have been struck as I've traveled around this country, the number of people who have raised the issue with me, the number of polls and research that is being focused on the issue of corruption. So I think what you're seeing here is a whole of society discussion about the importance of corruption, of calling it out, and of correcting it. That is what I would say a signal that your democracy is alive and it's strong. Now, having to deal with these problems of corruption is tough work. And as we've talked about before, Democracies require constant attention. They require constant work, and particularly some of these problems, which touch on people's vested interests and, and deep cultural practices that need to change. But I do think that what is most important here is that you have a very, very vocal and very energized civil society NGO sector that is forcing the government to be responsive on some of these issues. It's a huge demand signal, and the people want results and they want actions.
I'm sure that when you meet the minister or the prime minister or the other ministers, I'm talking about the Minister of Justice, they are saying that they are really dedicated to fight corruption. But then, what about? Do you think that there is a real political will this time to fight corruption properly?
I think so. I certainly hope so. I mean, look, that's been the tenor of all of my discussions that I've had with the government as they've taken the time to sit down with me and to share ideas. There appears to be a very reinvigorated agenda that is focused on democracy, on rule of law. There are other issues that we talk about, of course, energy security, the climate, and the pandemic. But the foremost issue that they have raised with me in our meetings is the importance of advancing these real reforms, the recognition that there have been a lot of plans and now is the time to implement and to make concrete progress. And that's certainly the way we see this issue and the opportunity. What we found with the Summit of Democracies was a level of motivation and momentum that we've never before applied to this problem set. I think the government recognizes that this is the number one issue that citizens are expecting them to address, and so they have a responsibility to move forward. And I found them to be very open and direct with me in terms of inviting the participation of my embassy and our government in working with the international partners to help support a positive agenda. So we're going to use this opportunity to try to respond also to that invitation on their part to work with them on many of these key issues.
One more question. In order to achieve those important goals for us, like judiciary reforms, fighting corruption, it's very important to have a proper political dialogue. And my impression is that we don't have a proper political dialogue. What's your understanding? What do you think, what the problem within this dialogue between the ruling parties and opposition?
Right. So obviously the lifeblood of democracy is political discourse and political debate. And, ideally that debate should be diverse. It should bring to light new ideas. Those ideas should be shared. And then the next focal point of democratic debate should be building consensus and working towards shared goals and shared visions. Again, maybe with different perspectives and different policies and points of view, but coming to a consensus that actually advances the agenda. And look, this is a problem for democracies, right? Because we invite different opinions. We invite citizens' participation into the process. We invite different political points of view into the process. And sometimes that means that reaching consensus is hard. I think the most important thing here is to stay focused on the central goal and to understand that there are some really key things that are both expected by the citizens and aspired to by the citizens that everybody should be working toward. And again, I would hope that in this moment of world events, with all of this focus on defending the rules-based order and of recognizing how important democracy and rule of law and standing up for freedom and standing up for democracy is, that will also help people focus on what's really important, and at the end of the day, where they need to come together. And obviously there will be some differences on certain issues. That's healthy. We recognize that even in our own country is an important part of our democratic debate. But at the end of the day, we all need to get behind the same goals. And for us, in our partnership, what we have focused on is the aspiration of the citizens of this country to have a better future for their children, a more secure and prosperous future that is based on the country's full integration into Euro-Atlantic institutions, being a part of Europe and all of the Western values that it brings with, and one that is in close partnership with the United States. So I think that there is a real moment of opportunity here, and that we should all be focused on trying to seize it and to meet that moment.
Ambassador Burns, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.